Hi there, and welcome back to Modern World History, where today we're going to be spending time looking at the Reformation period. Now, we've been looking at the Renaissance kind of like as an overall unit of study here. The Reformation is a part of that movement, a movement that's driven by the concept of humanism, which we've already discussed, and leads in turn to some pretty intense questioning of the way things have been done. So one thing about the Middle Ages that we've already kind of discussed a little bit is that people believed everything that they were told that they should believe by the church, by leadership. They didn't question politics. They didn't question authority. They found solace in their miserable lives and the hope of salvation, which is part of the reason why they were extremely religious. They also were incredibly ignorant. But as more and more ideas started to flood back into European scene from places like Byzantine and from places like the Middle East, you start seeing where people are questioning the way of doing things, and they question stuff that led to art. Okay, art. They question politics. They question, as we're going to learn in the Reformation, religion, and they questioned things like interactions with each other, and all these things led to economic interactions as well, and the exchange of new ideas, and the bringing back all these different things that the Greeks and Romans would do, and establishing new architecture. And I mean, you get the point, right? So the Reformation really is the Renaissance applied to the idea of religion. And when we talk about Renaissance, again, we're looking at this rebirth in art and thinking. This rebirth, this movement centered on human potential, okay? Which is what we mean when we say humanism. And people start questioning, well, how in the world can we make Christianity better? And the people really that started to question this probably first would have been some of your Christian humanists we spoke about in the last session. But in particular, people start noticing how even some of the priests, some of the clergymen are living a little bit on the secular side. They're more concerned with worldly goods. We already talked about how secularism is an important part of the Renaissance. But this kind of leads to this corruption and this emphasis on living well rather than on doing God's work. And so people start to pick up on this. And when I say people, like more of your intellectual, well-educated clergymen and other people that really might be a little bit more devout, like your Christian humanists we just spoke of, Desiderius Erasmus and Thomas More. Also, you start to see, on top of the corruption, on top of the secularism, the things that kind of stand out about the Catholic Church kind of going down the wayside a little bit, is the idea that you do also concurrently have humanism and secularism. You do concurrently have the printing press, which we spoke about being the email or the social media of its day. This here helped new ideas, and it helped to radically spread new ideas throughout Europe. You also have political rivals and economic competition. And so in the light of all of these things, Martin Luther, not to be mistaken with Martin Luther King Jr. of the Civil Rights Movement, but Dr. Martin Luther, he was a priest in Wittenberg, which is one of the principalities of Germany at the time. And he ends up looking at these indulgences that the Catholic Church was putting out. Now, down here, notice I've got a arrow leading to a definition here of what an indulgence is. Simply put, what they were using indulgences for in the 1500s, at the time of Martin Luther, is they were using it for paying for new extravagant buildings, for example, or for living in ways that kind of made them look almost like kings, rather than looking out for Christendom. And so what they were doing here is they were building these projects and taking money from the poor and ignorant who would pay these indulgences in order to spring their family out of purgatory. So purgatory, and we mentioned this a little bit in the first session video when we were looking at Dante's Inferno or Dante's Divine Comedy, Purgatory is a middle ground between heaven and hell. You're not quite good enough to go straight to hell, but you're not going to stay for all eternity. And I'm sorry, let me say it right. You might not be good enough to go to heaven, but you won't stay all your eternity in hell, which is great. The problem is that purgatory would last thousands of years, according to what these clergymen were telling these poor people. And so if they would spend all their money at this one particular time, almost like a scam, almost like a telemarketing scam, then they would be able to, according to the bishop, they could spring their relative or their friend out of purgatory. And so people would pay tons of money to the church in order to do this. And so really, in a large way, indulgences were a payment for one's sins. It was a buy your salvation. Now, anyone who's Christian today knows that you can't buy your way out of your sin. Jesus died for sins according to Christian belief, and so the only way to get into heaven is to believe that Jesus died for your sins. And Martin Luther here started to think about this and started to say, well, indulgences are bad practice. This isn't something that the church should be doing. It's not legit. And so he wrote up a article of writing known as the 95 Theses. I just totally took that away. Let me undo that. The 95 Theses. And this was a paper where he had 95 statements, more or less, against the church and their use of indulgences. And it really was something that was taken by the church as an attack. Okay, it was taken as an attack on indulgences and the church in general. So it was nailed onto the church door in Wittenberg, where Martin Luther lived. But then, because of this printing press we talked about, one of the individuals took it off the door and mass produced it. Okay, mass produced. And then it was sent out all over Europe, more or less. Eventually, obviously, the church got a hold of it. The Pope saw it and was completely outraged by this infidel, essentially. This heathen would take the time to attack the Holy Church for their ways and make them look bad. And so Martin Luther was excommunicated and tried as a heretic. Now, this trial was known as the Edict of Worms. And remember, when we're talking about Germany, we're looking at Wittenberg and Worms. This W here makes a V sound. Okay, my handwriting's terrible. A V sound. So we're talking about Wittenberg. Now, I may have just misspelled that. No one is going to really care about this, but just know that's the reason why I'm pronouncing it the way that I am. Now, Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. The Holy Roman Emperor was kind of like the leader of all the different German principalities. Germany really wasn't unified. They lived in different states known as principalities. They were governed by a prince who, together, they would pledge their allegiance to the Holy Roman Emperor, which also was the monarch of Spain, and at one point owned just a ton of territory. Very powerful individual. And Charles told Luther to recant, which means to take it all back. Take it back. Take it back. Say it wasn't true. And so he basically said to he basically said to Luther, if you don't go back and basically say that all of your writings about the church were completely just crap, then we're gonna have you excommunicated. You're gonna be in trouble. And Martin Luther obviously would not do that. So he did not recant. Okay, he says the big nope to that. And so Martin Luther was then forced into hiding, and he was protected by the Prince of Saxony, Prince Frederick of Saxony, also known as Frederick the Great. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen the movie Luther. The movie Luther, right? I think I'm talking about the 2003 version of this. It is a fantastic movie and does a very good job at highlighting all of these things that we're kind of talking about. While Luther was in hiding and being protected by Frederick the Great of Saxony, there was a peasant revolt. You see, peasants thought he was dead. Thought Luther dead. And so they freaked out and started to go after anyone who might represent the Catholic Church. They looted cathedrals. They went after nobility and princes that were pro-Catholic. And a lot of them still were pro-Catholic. And Martin Luther was pretty well outraged by this. And he was like, oh man, that's just terrible. You cannot do this. This is not what I stand for. And so Luther did not support the peasants. And when it's all said and done, about 100,000 people died during this revolt. Martin Luther told the princes of Germany to put it down, with whatever means necessary. Eventually, this squabbling went back and forth between Catholics and the new Protestants, or those who protested in order to defy the church. And some princes were like, hey, I think Martin Luther is on to something here. We're going to be Lutheran. Other princes thought this is an opportunity to break away from the Catholic Church and take back our own land. And so they wanted to be Lutheran for political gains. And then others were fiercely Catholic. Others were like, nope, we're not going to mess with what we know is not broken. It's the way things have always been. Why would we not want to be Catholic anymore? And so this movement that I'm talking about here is known as the Peace of Augsburg. Essentially, German princes, in other words, those who were in control of their principalities, were allowed to choose which religion they would be. And that is that in relation to the Protestant Reformation as far as Martin Luther is concerned. Now, as you might guess, we have a whole lot of different Protestant denominations that exist today, and this movement wasn't isolated to just Germany. And so in the next video, we will be talking about this guy here and the English Church Reformation with Henry VIII.